Golden Doves, class 212. We're page 127. Um, Borgesian mirrors distort. They function as a library of Babel, right? So, again, rejecting the post-modernist view that there is no reality and that there is no meaning, um, but rather we believe that language has the ability to distort. And because, right, so the same way, so I hear something and my mind is a mirror to your words, and then I say something and your mind, somebody else's mind is a mirror to my words, and then so on. Now, every time there's a mirror, it distorts a little, right? So there's a story called The Library of Babel, which kind of, I guess, explores this idea. Um, The Library of Babel. It was written in 1941 by Jorge Luis Borges, actually one of my favorite short stories. I'm not going to get into it now, but it makes a mockery of the theory of evolution, but not that's a topic for a different story, for a different class. I'm sorry. But the story itself is a fascinating story. It's an endless, almost like I think an infinite library. And in this infinite library, there are books, I believe, of exactly 410 pages. Every book is 410 pages, but there's every combination of every book, meaning you have all the books of Shakespeare, you have all the books of Aristotle, you have all the books of Herodotus, but then you have every variety of every single book ever created. Because when you have endless mirrors, so there's going to be an endless, right? There's going to be endless reflections and endless distortions. So you'll have Herodotus with a mistake of one letter, then you'll have Herodotus with a mistake of two letters, and you'll have a completely different version of Herodotus, and you'll have a story which disproves Herodotus, right? And then you have a story which disproves the disapproval of Herodotus, right? So the point of the story, I believe, is to disprove the theory of evolution. But here you have the idea of mirrors distorting. So there is an actual book, right? But then there are the distortions of the book, right? That's the problem. Um, so they function as the library of Babel, producing through progressive reflections endless variations, right? These variations entrap. But this is why you need a Torah Shebe'al Peh, because when you have a Torah Shebe'al Peh, it prevents the infinite distortion of things, right? You have, meaning there is a foundation, and yeah, there is a possibility of distortion, and there's a possibility of interpretation, of course. I'm not saying not. But there is also this absolute, let's call it an absolute truth in the text of the Torah Shebichtav, as that was those parts that were explained by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? There are parts that were explained by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So these variations entrap. Obviously, they entrap because every variation, maybe it's in the library of Babel. It poses a problem to the original text, right? Because it's a challenge. They make up the labyrinths enclosing the Minotaur, as in the house of Asterion. The Minotaur, right? So the house of Asterion is a story. So it's narrated by the first person, and this first person is offering a personal view of his own thoughts and feelings, and how he's isolated from the rest of the world. We all are isolated from the rest of the world, of course, right? Because nobody can really understand our inner thoughts as we do, right? It ends up in the story that the first person telling the story that, well, the house is an infinite labyrinth because there's always infinite possibility of interpretation, and he's always isolated because you can never fully break the isolation of the first person. Um, so it ends up that he's a minotaur, half person, half person, half bull. Now the only way, and he dreams of being redeemed, um, which means, I guess, being understood. The problem is that the redeemer of the minotaur is the one who's going to kill the minotaur, because the idea is once you understand the first person from inside the first person, well, there is no more first person, and the first person doesn't exist anymore. I'm assuming you got the subtlety at that point. So that's an interesting idea. Again, the idea of meaning, identity. Here, there is a unique perspective. So we're not negating meaning, but rather we're saying there's different mirrors and different perspectives, right? from the perspective of the Minotaur, he's not a Minotaur, right? He's just a unique person with unique feelings. He can't understand how other people view him as a monster. But from the perspective of the other person, that's a monster, and I'm beautiful, and maybe the Minotaur perceives me as a monster, right? So that's the labyrinth that we're all kind of stuck in. Again, it's not to say that there is no absolute truth and there is no absolute reality, because we receive the absolute truth from God, and we, the Jewish people, receive the word of God, and the words of God are immutable. They never change. The Torah Shebichtav is the slightest variant. Now you understand why even a difference of one letter will make the whole Sefer Torah pasul, because then it becomes an endless labyrinth. So the only way to avoid the endless labyrinth of different perceptions and different perspectives is if you have a Torah, which is a never-changing text. You get that? It's really an amazing idea. You see, the only solution to the solitude, the only solution to the endless mirrors, to the distortions, to the meaninglessness of endless varieties of endless books, is when you have the book, and the book is the Torah, right? So that's the only solution. That's the only solution to the Minotaur. That's what the Torah says, right? That's a solution, right? Right. That's a solution, and the words are absolute. And the meaning of the words, again, when I say the meaning, I don't mean that every meaning is fixed. I mean there are certain meanings, the yesodot that we receive from Moshe Rabbeinu. On that, you can have an infinite variety of derashot, but the derashot will never displace the meaning received from Moshe Rabbeinu. You understand? That's a very important point. And that's why we say that the Sanhedrin, לא תעשו מן הדבר שיגידו לך ימין ושמאל, שאומרים לך על ימין שהוא ימין ועל שמאל שהוא שמאל. Only if they tell you ימין שהוא ימין ועל שמאל שהוא שמאל, then you listen to them. Meaning, that's with respect to the things received from Moshe Rabbeinu, that you can never displace that meaning. Yeah. And then there's another idea, if we can switch to another story of Jorge Luis Borges, what begins in Tlon Ukbar Orbis Tertius as a fabrication of a false country eventually displaces the whole of civilization. So this story, there's a group of intellectuals, and it's a secret society of intellectuals. And what they do is they create an entirely fictional world called Tlon. And they write all these encyclopedias which describe everything about Tlon, the language, the philosophy, the geography, the customs, right? So it's an idealistic world, but here's the thing, it's not real. But then as the story progresses, the fictional world of Tlon seeps into the real world, and there's artifacts from Tlon that they start appearing on Earth, and then people begin to adopt Tlon's worldview and Tlon's philosophy. And the line between fiction and reality begins to blur. So here again, you have the idea of mirrors distorting. So if you have a particular concept in your mind, that concept can distort and eventually overtake reality, right? So it's the same problem, but once you posit that the mind is a mirror, you really have a problem. Where do you find meaning? How can you find meaning in a world where the mind distorts, mirrors distort, and then you have endless varieties of endless perceptions and endless perspectives? So it seems like tohu vavohu. Again, that's why you need Torah. The only solution is Torah. If you have no Torah, then there is no truth. Everything becomes everything becomes a library of Babel, a meaningless library. For every one real book, you have an infinite number of books, varieties for that book. Which is the real book? You don't know anymore, right? So in Tlon, you don't know which is the real world anymore, right? So you have a particular, you have a particular perception. A great example is the Democrat National Committee now. Kamala Harris is a campaign of joy. It's joy. It's so funny. I mean, people are so like, I don't know, like, did everybody get a brain lobotomy recently? Like, am I like missing something here? Like, did they not give me like the opportunity? Because I didn't get any email about getting my brain lobotomy. But anyway, it looks like the whole world got a brain lobotomy. It's a campaign of joy. Don't you understand? Voting for Kamala Harris will be joyful. Yes, it will be bread lines. Yes, it will be food shortages. Yes, in all likelihood, Putin will take over Ukraine and Poland and nuclear war and nuclear holocaust. But it's going to be a joyful nuclear holocaust. That's what you Republicans don't understand. So sorry for getting into politics, but it's like it's a great example of the stupidity of the human mind, but how when you don't have Torah, that you just have different mirrors reflecting and distorting, and what is reality? So the Democrats control all the media, so they put in everybody's mind, this is a joyful campaign, right? You understand? So they affect our minds. Um, yeah. The world will be tlon, Borges declares. It will be, because the concept you implant in people's minds will actually overtake the objective world. At the very outset of the story, we are told that the initial discovery of Ukbar and Tlon resulted from the conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. I think what that means is that the encyclopedia was this concept put into place by the intellectual elites, right? So there's the world is ending because cows, they fart, right? The cows have been farting for centuries and thousands of years, but now we discover that this is destroying the world, right? So it's a concept. So the concept, the encyclopedia, and then the mirror is the mind, right? So the mind reflects this encyclopedia, which is a concept, and then comes a world tlon, a world where, yes, cow farts destroying the world. We see what's happening in the world. The world is ending. Humanity has been extinct already for 10 years, according to global warming people. Greta Thunberg, the great scientist, has declared 15 years ago that in 5 years or 10 years, the world will end. I think, according to my human race will become extinct. So we're extinct. So you understand. So that's a conjunction of a mirror and an encyclopedia. Paradoxically, when there was absolute fidelity, as with Pierre Menard rewriting two passages from Don Quixote, the result is not only meaningless, it is also unrelated to the original. It becomes an unbook, an unreadable text. Now, if you want to go to the other extreme where you say no, so I'm going to be Pierre Menard. Um, so Pierre Menard wants to write Cervantes's Don Quixote by being Cervantes, and he wants to actually write it spontaneously, because if he's Cervantes, he should be able to write the words that Cervantes wrote. Right? I think he writes. I think in the story, it ends up that maybe he writes two lines of Cervantes. I don't remember. But anyway, he wants to write it word for word. He wants to create. He wants to be Cervantes. But the problem is that even the language of Pierre Menard changed, right? Pierre Menard cannot possibly experience what Cervantes experienced, even if he tries to, because you can't undo your original experiences. So even if you experience what Cervantes experienced, but Cervantes didn't experience what you experienced, so it's not the same thing, right? You follow? So the idea of having an absolute truth and there is no interpretation, and I'm going to be the original authorial intent, that's also absurd. That's why in the Torah we allow for interpretation, we allow for derashot, we allow for right? We allow for that dynamic process, because otherwise it becomes Pierre Menard. What really was the original, right? That is as ludicrous as the post-structuralists who posit that there is no meaning. And it becomes an unbook, an unreadable text. That's what happened with Pierre Menard's version of Don Quixote.